and welcome to Next Portable Console, NPC, if you like. My name is Brendon Bigley, and I'm here with John Voorhees.
Hello, Brendon. How are you today?
I am doing wonderfully, thank you so much. And I'm also here with Federico Vitici. Hello, Federico.
Hey, guys. Hello. How are you doing?
We're doing great because everyone loved episode 1,
Yes.
which is wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much to everybody who checked out the first episode. Really means a lot. And hopefully you stick around. Last week's, more of an introductory period, I think. What is this show about? This week, we're just getting really in the weeds so quickly, which I'm really excited about. Federico, you teased at the end of last week's episode a big project that you're working on.
Literally a big project, like in physical size.
Physically large.
Yeah. And you and I also got our hands on a new device that I'm very excited to talk about a little bit later. But I mean, should we just get right into what you've been working on, Federico? I feel like I don't want to leave people lingering for too long.
Okay, so we'll get right into that, and then we'll do just a quick news recap before we jump into another topic. But I guess I left people with a cliffhanger last week.
You did.
So let's get into it. So the idea is that, as I showed you guys, I wanted to build, and this is going to sound so pretentious, and I'm sorry, but like it was my actual goal. I wanted to build the best eGPU in the world. Like that was a pretty simple, maybe slightly lofty goal.
Is it simple if there are entire R&D departments that work at companies that are also trying to do this?
And working with Federico directly, I believe. Right, Federico?
Yeah, exactly.
Spoiler, it wasn't simple. So I wanted to build the best eGPU in the world because I wanted to achieve the dream setup, which is a portable handheld, a Legion Go, that could transform from a handheld into a desktop gaming PC with really good performance. If you've been following me for my other line of work at Mac Stories, you know that that's kind of also what I've been doing with my iPad. Like this idea of having one device that can transform from a portable machine to a desktop workstation is pretty much in line with that sort of thinking. So I wanted to use the Legion Go because I really like the Legion Go. Like I've literally tried all of the handhelds that have been released so far. I guess minus the MSI Claw, but like I don't think I'm missing out on anything.
No. There's probably a few ANEOs that you missed too there.
Oh yeah, and probably a few ANEOs. I mean, to be fair, there are so many of those. So I wanted to use the Legion Go, and the Legion Go specifically is well suited for this sort of project because at the moment, so we're recording this a little bit in advance. By the time this episode is out, it's kind of likely that the ROG Ally X will be released. But at the moment of recording this, the Legion Go is the only handheld with 2 USB 4 ports. And this was the key detail sort of that kickstarted this entire project. USB 4 has a lot of benefits over Thunderbolt when it comes to external graphics cards. The idea is kind of similar. You're using a USB-C shaped cable to plug in an external graphics card into a handheld. The handheld switches from the internal GPU to the external one, and that gives you better performance. The cables look the same. I mean, you got to thank the USB, what's it called, consortium or something? Like, the USB association for that. The cables look the same, but they're not the same.
Oh, the USB-A. Yes. Or the USB-C.
They are not the same. So here, the idea is, years ago, I used to have a Thunderbolt-based eGPU.
Right.
And Thunderbolt eGPUs, there are so many of them. And you can get an enclosure, and inside of the enclosure, you put an actual desktop graphics card, like an NVIDIA RTX or one of the AMD ones. Like you can get an actual desktop graphics card into an enclosure. The enclosure has a Thunderbolt-based motherboard. You connect that. I mean, that used to be possible even with Apple computers when they were based on Intel. Right. You could use a Thunderbolt eGPU. And of course, you can use Thunderbolt on Windows now too, since it's made by Intel. However, the problem is that Thunderbolt-based eGPUs are really, really, really limited in terms of performance bottlenecks by the CPU. This means that when you're using Thunderbolt, you're losing roughly 40 to 50% of the performance of the GPU. All of that performance gets lost in the Thunderbolt bandwidth because there's just not enough space to accommodate in that cable, in the Thunderbolt cable, and in the Thunderbolt controller that is inside the CPU. There's not enough space to fit all of the data coming from the GPU. So, like, for example,
it's incredible.
I know, it's wild. Years ago, I used to have a Razer Core enclosure, and inside of it, there was an NVIDIA 3080 Ti, and I was getting like about 50% of the performance of that graphics card at the time. So when I approached this idea again, I think it all obviously started with a Reddit thread.
As
like
most things do with you, I think.
As most things do with me. And I discovered that USB 4 has many advantages over Thunderbolt, mainly in terms of bandwidth. With USB 4, and specifically version 1 of USB 4, speaking of confusion, there's also USB 4 version 2. That is,
of course.
I mean, now...
Then there'll be 2x2 and whatever.
Look, I'm so sorry. It's not my fault. Just know that it's not my fault.
Yeah.
USB version 1, it supports the full bandwidth that is allowed by the CPU.
Okay.
And in practical terms, when I was doing my research on Reddit, looking at the same GPU connected to, for example, a Legion Go over Thunderbolt versus over USB, we were looking at a jump from 2.5 gigabit per second data transfer to 3.7. So you were gaining like a full 1.2, 1.3 gigabit per second more just by using USB 4. And that, when you're benchmarking or when you're playing a video game like Cyberpunk, for example, it really does make a difference because you have more than a gigabit more going into the CPU, going into the console from the external graphics card. And that, of course, got me really interested in all of this. Especially because the Legion Go has 2 USB 4 ports. Now, you may be wondering, well, why 2 ports? Now, the problem is that at the moment, there is only one, like literally only one USB 4 enabled board that you can use for an eGPU. It's made by a company called ADT Link, and it's called the UT3G. This is a tiny PCB board that has a USB connector, has a socket on top to put in your desktop graphics card, and then you got to build an enclosure around it. You know, you got to put ventilation, you got to use a power supply unit. It was a whole project. And the reason why 2 USB 4 ports were important is that at the moment, this is the only USB 4 board that supports eGPUs, but it does not support power delivery, which means the USB cable that you will connect from the eGPU to your Legion Go, it will not charge the Legion Go. You need to charge it separately. Hence why the 2 ports were necessary. So
I was concerned you were going to try and plug 2 graphics cards in there for some reason.
For double the pleasure.
For a hot second, I was like,
some people have tried, and I think I think it's technically possible. And then in Windows settings, you can assign, I want to use this program with this GPU, and I want to use this other program with this other. Like, some people have done it. I don't recommend it because, like, just don't do it.
So you can you mine Bitcoin while you're playing a game or something like that?
I mean, some people use eGPUs for that, actually. Yeah. I don't recommend it. But
train large language models maybe instead.
Also that, or use CUDA, CUDA-enabled like LLMs and stuff like that if you have an NVIDIA GPU. But anyway.
A couple tabs in Chrome, maybe.
Slack. Running. Any Electron
Open Google
app.
Docs.
So, with all this knowledge, I started thinking, well, this sounds really interesting. I could have, the Legion Go as a handheld, and then when I want to play at my desk with a really good monitor, plug it in, and I'm getting an actual, like, almost the performance of a traditional PC. And I wanted to go with an NVIDIA 4090, of course, because I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I may just go straight high-end, all the way, top of the line, like, what's the best I can get?
Yeah, you said best right at the top.
I said best. I want to build the best eGPU in the world. So I started piecing together this information, like, okay, it's got to be USB 4. It's got to be an NVIDIA 4090.
Right.
How do I build it? Like, it was my next question was like, okay, I need to have a power supply unit, and I need to have, like, an enclosure around this system. Like, otherwise, it's just going to be like a bunch of wires and a PCB board on my desk. Like, no, I don't want to do it. It needs to be protected, ventilated. Like, it needs to be an actual thing. Now, of course, once again, I turned to Reddit. I found this lovable guy from Las Vegas that had custom built a 3D printed enclosure for exactly the kind of specs that I was looking for. An enclosure big enough, which is the one I showed you on the last episode, big enough to accommodate any desktop GPU, including one of the 40 series NVIDIA graphics cards, a chunky power supply unit inside, an additional exhaust fan for ventilation, the USB 4 board I wanted, and optionally, if you're into that, even RGB lighting, which, spoiler, I did not go with RGB lighting.
All right. Let me ask you something here, Federico. There've got to be plenty of enclosures for 4090s out there. Why did you go? Why did you go with the 3D printed one?
You would think so. You would think that there are plenty of enclosures for the 4090 out there, but not really, actually.
Really? Huh.
Because, and here's the thing, so far, eGPUs, like the entire eGPU scene, has been based on Thunderbolt.
Right.
And with Thunderbolt, because of the performance bottleneck, there is really no sense in getting a 4090 to go with your Thunderbolt-based eGPU.
Got it.
Because you're basically getting the performance of a 4060 or a 4070 at
Right.
most.
Spending a ton of money for it, yeah.
It doesn't really make sense if you have a Thunderbolt eGPU. And so there aren't really, like, one of the, arguably the most popular eGPU enclosure is the Razer Core. And the Razer Core, it doesn't fit the latest NVIDIA graphics cards, nor does it need to, because it doesn't make any sense to use them. Really.
Right.
And obviously, I should also mention one of the other eGPU standards that you may have seen mentioned lately is Oculink. Now, I think we're going to talk about Oculink in the future on this show, but I didn't want to go with Oculink because it's a proprietary standard. It's actually already discontinued. Like, Oculink is no longer being developed. It's going to be replaced, I think, in 2025 by the new standard made by the same company, which is going to be called Copperlink. And so I didn't want to go for a connector for an eGPU. It was going to give me better performance than USB 4, but it's been already discontinued. And so I didn't want to do it. I just wanted to go full on USB, as universal as you can go. So back to the enclosure. I couldn't find anything, sort of like off the shelf that would fit my specs. But to answer your question, John, this enclosure from this person in Las Vegas, it was designed around fitting the UT3G USB board that I wanted to use. Okay. It was actually designed around that USB 4 board. And also, this person was a huge Legion Go fan. Like, they were posting benchmarks and gaming examples, like using the Legion Go with an eGPU. I was like, okay,
right.
You know what? Just let me get in touch with this guy. And I did.
Yeah.
And, like, this has to be I had 2 excellent Reddit interactions for this story. This is the first one. I worked with this person for like 2-3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
They printed one for me, shipped it to me. included instructions, extra tools like screws that were not included. All I had to do was get the 4090, get a power supply unit, get the USB board from AliExpress, which took a couple of weeks to arrive. But yeah, and then I got the enclosure from the Reddit person in Las Vegas. I got to work and I built it. And I configured it and it was working. But I ran into two problems. I was really happy, I should say. Like, I plugged in my Legion Go, and you need to do a bunch of things. I will have an article on Mac Stories that will explain this stuff. You need to install a bunch of drivers. There's a few things that you need to do on Windows to enable it. But once it's enabled, it's as plug and play as it can get. Like, you just plug a USB cable in, the GPU is detected, and suddenly you can play Dragon's Dogma, a 4K with ray tracing on a Legion Go or with an external display. Like, it's incredible.
Beautiful.
That's amazing.
It's beautiful. It's amazing. However, two things happened. The first one, I realized, John knows the second one already. The first one is, I realized I bought 2 months ago a fiber optic Thunderbolt cable.
Something that I didn't even know existed in the world, but at a price can be had.
At a price can be had. A 10 meter
10 meter long
10 meter
Thunderbolt cable.
fiber optic cable. The idea being,
Yeah.
Brendon, that I wanted to leave my eGPU in the office with all the noise and all the heat and run
I know exactly where this is going.
and run a 10 meter
Yeah.
Down the
run a
hall.
10
Of
meter
course.
cable down the hall
under his bed.
to my bed so that I could play with the Legion Go in bed. And much to my surprise, unfortunately, this Thunderbolt cable is not USB 4 certified.
Right.
So it just, this board, this USB board that I'm using, it's just pure USB 4. No other cable will work. It needs to be USB 4, and not even USB 4, USB 4 certified by Intel. Like, it's very picky about the cable you use, which is why I am now using the default cable that comes with the board itself. Like, I'm just using that.
How long is that?
80 centimeters, and I've tried. It's short. It's a short cable.
Yeah.
And I tried others, and I discovered that with USB 4 at the moment, the shorter the cable, the fewer headaches you will have.
That's true with Thunderbolt too, so I'm not surprised. Yeah.
And the second problem is that one night, so I was playing Dragon's Dogma, and everything seemed cool. And then at some point the game freezes, and I'm like, "Wait, what's happening here?" And so I go to the office, and the game is frozen on the monitor as well. I was streaming with Moonlight.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I guess the eGPU crashed and the game froze. So I tried disconnecting the eGPU and it wasn't working. So I was like, okay, well, let me disconnect the cable and turn off the power supply of the enclosure. So I turned it off. I gave it a few seconds, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna turn it back on again, which is what everybody does and what I've always done. And when I turned it back on again, so for context, my face was right in front of the enclosure. I hear a loud pop in front of my face, and I see a bit of smoke coming out of the enclosure. And for context, now it's 3 a.m. Okay, so my girlfriend is sleeping, the dogs are sleeping, and I see smoke, and I can feel this horrible smell coming out of the enclosure. And so I start panicking. I thought it was catching on fire. I thought, something happened here, and I am about to burn down my house. And now, thankfully, it was just, as it turns out, I checked the following morning. I had a faulty power supply. It's just something that may happen, unfortunately.
Right.
The PSU popped a cap, which is a component that is part of the power supply. it just exploded, like this tiny rectangle, like cylinder-shaped cap. And it happens if you get a faulty unit, which is also from a well-known, reputable brand. Like it wasn't like a random cheap thing from Amazon, but still may happen. So I asked for a refund, and everything's good there. And I upgraded to an even better power supply by Asus. So I'm really happy with that. And lastly, I told you guys that I finally finished this setup yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
The final thing I did was I discovered, also thanks to Reddit, that this USB board, there was a newer version in existence.
Of course there was.
And it's got to be the best, as we all know.
And it
Of
has to be
course.
the best. Well, I had version 1.2 and there was version 1.5. And so I assumed, well, version 1.5 has to be the best, right?
Of
And
course.
again, I was building the best eGPU in the world. So
It's
it
a bigger
needed to be
number
the-
after all, The
It's a
bigger
bigger
numbers
number.
are always better.
But most importantly, it had a minor difference that was, however, very important to me. And that is my version of the board had a teeny tiny fan sitting on top of the USB chip in the board
Uh-huh.
to keep it cool. This tiny fan, and I showed John a picture yesterday, it was making this hellish noise every time it was like very
The cheap
high
fan,
pitched
yeah.
cheap fan, very high pitched noise. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, this bothers me so much. Version 1.5 has a giant heatsink instead. Now you maybe think, well, active cooling is better than passive cooling. Yes,
Sure.
but my GPU enclosure
Has a lot
not
of
only
fans.
has a lot of fans, there's two fans for the 4090 itself, and I have an additional fan that I installed. So keeping the enclosure cool is actually not a problem. I wanted to get the version with the heatsink because it was going to be quieter. Once again, for the fourth time today, I turned to Reddit and I found
Shout out.
I found the one guy from Hong Kong who managed to get version 1.5 of the USB board I wanted to use. And I was desperate, okay? I needed to finish this project in time for the recording of this episode. So once again, out of the blue, I sent a message on Reddit. I was like, hey, I saw that you have version 1.5 of the board. Can you tell me where you got it? Because I'm kind of in a rush. I actually said I need to finish this project for a podcast that I'm doing.
Wow.
And so they were like, I got it
Very
from obviously from AliExpress, and it took just 3 days to get to Hong Kong. But I assume it's gonna be a while until you get it in Italy. And then he said, but if you want, I can send you mine.
Oh.
And I was like, are you sure? And so I worked with this guy, incredibly, just like the first person, incredibly kind and helpful person from Reddit, who actually sold me his version 1.5 USB board for an eGPU. I was like, yeah, sure, don't worry about it. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'll get a new one in a couple of days. I'll just send you mine with UPS express delivery. I was like, thank you. You're a lifesaver.
Incredible.
I got it yesterday, opened up my enclosure, swapped the board, closed it up again, and I'm done.
That's amazing. That's an
I am
amazing
finally,
story.
after it took me 25 minutes to go over all the details, but after all of this, I'm done. I have the best eGPU in the world for my Legion Go.
And you're probably the only person that has that exact setup, except maybe the guy in Vegas, although he probably has the one with the fan.
The guy in Vegas has version 1.2.
See.
At least based on our previous conversation from a few weeks ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions for you, Federico.
Okay.
The first one is, how much warmer is your office than the rest of your apartment when you're playing a game in bed?
That is a good question.
I would love to know that, because I assume that whole setup is like a little tiny space heater.
Well, I can tell you, like, if you put your hand like where the exhaust fan is, oh
Yeah.
yeah, like
Mhm.
it's toasty. But it
Sure,
does the job.
between
Like, it needs to put out hot air from inside. I need to
Sure.
install a temperature sensor on my desk, and I'll let you know.
I would like to
I'm
know.
I'm gonna guess at the very least it's gonna be 3-4 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, I would think
warmer.
so. I would think so because the Legion Go itself is throwing off a fair amount of heat too. Because you've got a
Oh,
special.
I forgot to mention about the Legion Go.
Yes, I know you have a special cooling setup there, don't you?
I have a cooling stand for my Legion Go. So the
Oh,
thing,
really?
yeah. So the thing about the Legion Go, when you're using an eGPU, is the Z1 Extreme, the chip of the Legion Go. It puts in a lot of work when it's using 2 USB 4 ports at the same time, one being an eGPU and the other handling like Ethernet and charging at the same time. It puts
Right,
in a lot of work. So the back part of the Legion Go, specifically in the bottom left, where the system on a chip is, it gets real hot.
It gets
And
so
if
hot
it
that
gets-
the screen gets hot. I think.
screen gets hot.
Even the front of the thing is hot. Yeah.
Yep. And if it gets too hot, you run into throttling
Yeah.
and you run into eGPU disconnections because the system
Right.
is like, nope, I'm out of here. I don't want to handle this anymore. So it just so happened that I used to have in storage an old cooling stand that I got for my Android-based high-resolution music player. It's like a fancy iPod running Android, basically, for my local music collection. Because also those devices get hot when you're playing like high-res music with like, actual like audiophile headphones.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, once again, one of the many benefits of the Legion Go, you can detach the controllers and you can rotate it in portrait. If I put the Legion Go in portrait, the USB 4 ports would be on the sides and the cooling stand would perfectly cool the section of the Legion Go that was getting warm. So yeah, I also have a cooling stand for my Legion Go that keeps it nice and cool, no throttling anymore, full, basically almost like 4 gigabit per second bandwidth, and no random disconnections anymore.
Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. If people want to hear the whole surprise about your power supply, they should listen to Mac Stories Unwind. I'll put a link to it in the show notes because you and I talked about this, and I was amazed at that story because wasn't that like an 1100 watt power supply, and now you've got like 1,000 watts? That's a lot of power that you're pushing through that eGPU.
So I gotta be honest with you guys, okay? So the NVIDIA 4090, it requires, I think, you can comfortably get a 750 watt power supply, and you're gonna be okay. So you may be wondering, well, why did you go with 1,000 watts? And I figured, well, if this has to, if I want to keep my title of the best eGPU in the world, when the 5090 comes out, it needs to be ready for the 5090.
Right.
So
You got to future-proof it.
I needed to
Yeah.
future-proof it as much
Got
as
it.
possible, So that's why, yeah.
Got it. Wow.
I appreciate this story for a lot of reasons. More specifically, I think in the context of this show, it is called Next Portable Console, right? I feel like this space right now is so focused on retro and the past, but you are literally building the future. Like what you are building right now is a thing that in, I would guess, 5 years, probably is a thing that people will be able to buy commercially.
Right. It
It's
won't be
like
as,
it's
won't
the
be as big
equivalent
as
of
a
that
toaster.
scene.
Yeah.
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 It's almost that scene in The Devil Wears Prada where they talk about how fashion makes its way down to like kind of the cheaper stores that becomes more commercially available. You are doing that literally with a handheld right now via the Legion Go, which is exhilarating. I mean, that's very cool. The closest I have to anything like that is literally just owning the Steam Deck and a dock, and that is exciting enough to me. I can't even imagine where you're at, as much as I would love to be playing Dragon's Dogma 2 on that level right now.
Yeah.
'Cause,
I mean,
what an incredible game.
I did not even realize that this was possible, Federico. I mean, what I've got is the Legion Go 2, but I've also got an eGPU, but it's just a mobile eGPU.
Oh yes, so that's another that's another sort of side of this entire eGPU scene.
Right.
I believe, John, you have the 1X GPU,
I
which
do.
is also the one I used to have before this one. That eGPU is a portable one. It's basically the size of think of it as like a giant battery pack. Like
Yeah, a
power
very
bank.
large one of the really big ones. Yeah.
A very large power bank. Now, that eGPU is based on the laptop version of the AMD 7600M XT. It's a laptop GPU by AMD. Now, that laptop GPU powers literally all of the USB and Oculink portable eGPUs right now. The GPD-G1, the 1X GPU, the eGPU that ANEO just announced. I saw somebody else yesterday announce another portable eGPU with literally the same 7600 AMD GPU. Like right now, that like if you want to get better performance for your handheld, whether it has USB 4 or Oculink, and you don't want to go with my approach, which is build a desktop one, that I think is the answer. Like, get a portable one.
That it's it's not cheap, but it is a very good solution. It does make a noticeable difference, I think. And I think what you're chasing, I mean, you're like way out on the frontier with this, but it is possible to do it with these portable ones at like at a lower price point. And what's cool about it to me is that, I mean, the dream here is to bring desktop quality gaming to a handheld. And we're getting there. We're actually getting there. And you're showing that, with a lot of work, you can get pretty close to what you could do with a full-on desktop PC.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think even in some ways, one of the dreams for me in some case, I mean, maybe for all three of us, considering we're all pretty primarily locked into the Apple ecosystem, is like, how do I get a desktop gaming computer without needing to actually buy and have on my desk a desktop gaming computer in some ways? And the idea of having something like the Legion Go as this like portable gaming console that, for all intents and purposes, could be your whole PC if you wanted it to be, as long as you're docking it and plugging it into your same monitor. I think that's a really compelling idea for me, at least. Somebody who literally doesn't have any more room on my desk for a gaming PC, despite really wanting access to Windows. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think the other direction to go with that is the micro PCs, which I know you've experimented with a little bit, Federico. But I prefer the handheld because then it's just a little bit more flexible.
I agree. Like I did try a mini PC. There are many of those. I did try that instead of a Legion Go for like 2 days, but I ran into some really nasty like performance issues. And that is, after doing some Google searches, I discovered that many of these mini PCs, let's just say that they are not assembled with the same care and the same quality assurance testing as you may get from brands like Lenovo or Asus or, all these other bigger companies that really test these devices. And so, and plus what Brendon said, like the idea of, I don't have a gaming PC. I have this handheld that can be like a tiny, thick tablet that sort of when docked becomes a PC with an eGPU, but otherwise I can just grab it and I can play Hades 2 on my Legion Go, obviously without an eGPU, but or I could play Dragon's Dogma at low settings, which is okay, but not great by any means. And in that case, though, I prefer having an eGPU. So it's that idea of flexibility and sort of modularity that speaks to me.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
I'm really interested in that mini PC market. From what I understand, it's about to get significantly more interesting with some of the more recent chips via that Microsoft event that happened recently.
Right.
Which I think should be kind of the shot in the arm that whole market needs. I'll give a shout out to Tech Dweeb on YouTube, who is doing a really good job of covering that whole scene. If you want to see which ones are actually like worth investing in and which ones are worth checking out, if that sounds appealing to you, just having a PC the size of like a CalDigit Thunderbolt dock sitting on your desk.
Right.
That's like capable of emulating pretty much everything you could want.
Mm-hmm.
Already exists. I know Asus has one coming out as
Yep.
well. They just bought a company, and they're kind of converting it into like the ROG mini PC brand, which I think should be very interesting. But
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing that,
Oof,
Federico.
you're
That's
welcome.
pretty wild. I'm excited to hear now that it's future-proofed how much better it gets. Are you able to push Dragon's Dogma even further than Capcom possibly imagined? Will you be playing Dragon's Dogma 3 before anybody else? I think that it's possible. I think it's in your future.
You'll be
And that's exciting to me.
You'll be shocked to know that even with all this power, sometimes the frame rate dips. with
Oh,
Dragon.
totally.
Oh, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
that's just Dragon's Dogma 2.
But it's just
Yeah.
Dragon's Dogma 2. Like,
Right.
and I don't care because it's an incredible game. So,
Yeah.
that being said, so Brandon and I, we do have a new handheld that we want to talk
A
about.
retro handheld. Yeah,
A
mine's
retro handheld.
Yes.
Mine's in the mail, Federico. Mine's sitting in
Yours
New
in-
Jersey of all places, and I'm a little
Okay.
upset about it. But I
Oh,
Oh, I'll just go swing by and pick it up
yeah,
for you.
that would be great, Brendan. I would appreciate it. It was at JFK.
I'll hand deliver it.
It was at JFK yesterday, and now it's hanging out in New Jersey.
That's
and
not too far from me, actually.
so we'll see. But I want to hear more about this because we're talking about the Anbernic 35XXSP, a name that just kind of rolls right off the tongue there.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But I have a lot of questions because it's the form factor is like the Game Boy Advance SP. But I want to hear how it works in practice from you guys.
I'll hold it up. We got video.
There it
Very
is.
This
nice.
is what it looks
Very
like.
nice.
There it is.
Yeah.
I got the same color. Yeah.
I ended.
Oh, you also got silver. Yeah.
silver.
I went with the dark transparent one.
Of course.
Oh, nice.
I like
Yeah.
everything
Yeah,
transparent.
Yeah, the transparent one has a removable face cover, which is cool.
Yep.
So you can like slide in graphics and stuff if you want to customize it a little bit.
Yep.
I went with the silver just because that's what I owned when I had the Game Boy Advance SP back in the day, and I just want to cover it in stickers. And I have been spending so much time on Etsy just looking up stickers and like inspecting the size and making sure that I get the right size.
Right.
But I'm just going to cover this thing in stickers. I'm stoked about it. Federico, I'm kind of curious from your perspective because you don't have the largest history with these kinds of devices
No.
specifically.
No.
I'm curious how your I mean I know a little bit of what your experience has been like, but I'm curious just like kind of coming in from the outside because I have used I feel like hundreds of these at this point.
Right.
So I can get into some minute differences, but how did it feel to boot one of these up for the first time? Because I'm sure it was a little bit daunting in a totally unexpected way.
Yeah, so I'm a little new to the retro handheld market. I've always I've been into like modern like PC handhelds,
Right.
but not the retro sort of Android or Linux based ones. And I found it very confusing, and I thought I was losing my mind.
Yeah.
So I got it kind of quickly from AliExpress, I gotta say, and I booted it up, and first I was shocked by the fact that there was like an internal library of ripped games, like
Yeah.
actual PSP and Super Nintendo, like literally every console supported by this had like essentially pirated copies of the game files inside.
I
was
was
like,
surprised,
"What?"
Federico, that you didn't know this because you had an Anbernic back in the day. You had one of those older ones.
I did have one many years ago,
Yeah.
4 years ago probably.
Yeah.
I absolutely did not remember any of it. Like
Okay.
it's just I think the pandemic wiped it out of my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they come with little micro SD cards. Mine came with a 64-bit SD card from Kioxia, which
they're-
had their stock operating system, the one that Anbernic put together for this device, along with, I don't know, probably around 1,000 games from every console that this thing can run. My move usually, I just take that card out immediately. But I did want to experiment with the Anbernic stock OS this time around because I would say the two biggest knocks against Anbernic devices over the years have been the SD card you get with it will always fail, so you should just buy a new one
okay.
and then load it
I
up.
think that's
Okay.
true with most of them, really. Like Miyu's like that
Yeah.
too, I think.
And the other side is that the stock operating system is going to be terrible, and you'll want to flash a new one on there. I will say, in the case of the RG35XXSP, I'm just going to say the whole name every time.
God.
In the case of this device, the card that it came with is like legit. Kiosia is like a company that makes hard drives. It's like an actually good SD card for the first time ever. And according to a lot of people, at least in the review period from what I had seen, the stock operating system is like pretty great for some people. It has a bunch of overlays built in, so if you're playing things like the Game Boy Advance, it puts a little Game Boy Advance SP border around the games, which kind of makes it look a little bit more natural, makes it really actually look like the Game Boy Advance SP in a lot of cases, which is cool. If you close the clamshell, it goes to sleep, which is very nice. It has a really cool option as well, where if you don't want it to go to sleep, because if you close the device and it goes to sleep, you'll lose like 4 to 5% of your battery life per hour while it's in sleep mode. But you can turn on another thing that they included in the stock OS, which is a mode that as you close the clamshell, it will automatically save the game in RetroArch, like a save state, and then turn the device off. And when you open it up again and press the power button, it will turn itself back on, load that save state immediately. It takes like 18 to 20 seconds to do that, but you're not losing battery the entire time that the thing is closed, which I think is really interesting. So in the case of this device, it actually feels like, maybe 4 years too late, but Anbernic has kind of figured out the two main things that people have, that people take issue with their devices. That said, I immediately swapped the SD card and I wiped the stock OS.
Oh,
installed a new one on my side.
Really?
What did you put on?
Yeah, so I was kind of poking around and seeing what works, because right now there isn't a whole lot available that is built for the RG35XXSP. There are a couple kind of like legendary operating systems, custom firmwares that people have made. One of the ones that a lot of people really like but has kind of slowed on its development is Garlic OS, which is essentially an Anbernic version of Onion OS, which is, in my opinion, the best custom firmware ever made for any of these devices.
Really
it only works on the Miyu Mini and the Miyu Mini Plus. It is like, in a lot of cases, the reason people are waiting for the Miyu Flip instead of buying the RG35XXSP. Just because the idea of having a clamshell device that runs Onion OS is so enticing to people, me included, if I'm being honest. I think Onion OS is an unbelievable custom firmware, and the team that made that is brilliant. But looking around at the landscape of what was available, there are a couple custom firmware options that do run on the SP, regardless of whether they were designed for it or not. One of which I mentioned is Garlic OS. There is an early alpha right now that is available for the SP. I was kind of experimenting with it a little bit, but it seemed a little bit too early and a little bit too unstable to really run fully. There's another one that's called Nulli, KNULLI, that a lot of people like a lot, that I have not experimented with. I checked out MinUI, which is about as clean and, hence the name, minimal as possible. You open it up and there's the list of your games and you just play them and you don't even really need to think about anything else. But the one I landed on is one called MUOS, which stands for Mustard OS.
Okay.
And the reason I picked it is, although they don't have an SP-specific build yet, it does have support for a sleep mode, which I think is crucial in a lot of ways. And also, you could just like reskin it. It has nicer looking UI options than what you get with the stock firmware, which was the most important thing to me. There's a huge team of people in the MUOS Discord who are just constantly building and releasing themes that you can mess around with. I had one for a little bit that just looked like the Dreamcast starting screen, which was like deeply silly to open up the Game Boy Advance SP and have a Dreamcast thing looking at me. But one that I went with, I'll shout it out, is called, I think, just Pop Blue. And honestly, it rocks. I'm a big fan of it. I'll hold it up to the camera.
Oh, that looks
nice.
like,
that does look good.
It looks really nice. You can like navigate it pretty easily. It just has like a really clean thing going on. And I will say, as somebody who has kind of held off on buying a new retro handheld like this one for a while, because I think I mentioned in the last episode, I have this like trifecta of the Miyu Mini Plus, which is kind of the one that's always in my bag as I'm commuting. I have the Retroid Pocket Flip, which I'm using for kind of longer games like Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6, which are all like DS games. And then I have the Odin 2 Pro, which I'm using for pretty much everything else. for Into the Aether, we're replaying the entire GameCube library. I'm doing a mix of playing stuff on original hardware and playing stuff on the Odin 2. But I've been waiting for a clamshell. I love the Retroid Pocket Flip because it's a clamshell, and I've been waiting for a clamshell device in that like lower price range. And it's worth mentioning the 35XXSP is at most going to cost you like $65 US,
Right.
which is like, I think, a steal in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's like perfectly
Nearly
priced. I was expecting it to be closer to like $80 or $90, if I'm being totally honest, just given the form factor. I thought it was going to be harder to machine and make. But $65 puts it around the same price as the rest of the 35XX line. So they have a vertical and a horizontal handheld in the same line that uses the same chipset, same capabilities. If you're looking for like what you can play on this thing, it goes up through the PSP-ish. Not that I would recommend playing PSP on the SP because it doesn't have an analog stick.
Right.
Kind of
a little hard.
makes it pretty difficult. Yeah, same thing with Dreamcast and N64. It's a little bit difficult. They do have some stuff, again, in the stock operating system where they turn the D-pad into an analog stick.
Yeah, I saw that.
By default for some of those games. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, didn't mess with it at all because I just hated the UI so much. I needed to bail immediately.
Yeah.
And I didn't really mind losing the sleep mode. I also found somewhere online, on Reddit, believe it or not, somebody uploaded the Game Boy Advance SP border that comes with the stock firmware. So I just added that into MUOS as well. But, you're still getting, like with MUOS at least, you're still getting Wi-Fi connectivity, which is great for things like downloading games if you want to. MUOS comes with Portmaster, which is a way to download a bunch of other games. Like I have Spelunky Classic on here,
Nice.
which for me is kind of the dream to have Spelunky on the go on a device like this. You still have Bluetooth connectivity, which means if you want to play something like a PSP or a Dreamcast game, you can obviously connect like a Bluetooth controller, like a 8BitDo or something. And it also has HDMI out, which is pretty wild. I have not experimented with this yet. It seems kind of silly in some ways, but you could, if you wanted to, open this up, plug it in through HDMI, and plug that into a monitor or a television, connect a Bluetooth controller, and all in one, you just have this kind of like little retro console suddenly.
That's really cool.
Which is like the smallest possible version of your eGPU.
Right.
I think.
Right. I think, I think it's the OS, the Anbernic OS, that really has kept me from buying any more of those until now. I mean, I bought mine 4 or 5 years ago, my original one. And I just disliked that OS so much that I just kind of stayed away for years. But it was the form factor of this that really drew me back. And I guess one question I want to ask you about it, Brendon, is I know it's thicker than an SP. How chunky is it? Is it comfortable to hold?
It is comfortable to hold. It is. I've handed it to 2 people in my life, both my partner and my boss at work, who is also interested in these. Hello, Ryan, if you're listening. And both of them said the same thing, which is, oh, this is made for adults.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Game Boy Advance SP, wonderful device, but if you're still playing it now, after playing it as a kid or when you were younger or whatever, it feels really small in the hand.
It does,
in a way that gets uncomfortable very quickly. I found that the Anbernic version of the SP, just being a little bit thicker and a little bit wider as well, makes it feel a lot more comfortable in the hand than I was expecting. And honestly, this form factor, this is the thing that's, I think, concerned me about getting into the clamshell side of things. I don't like vertical devices, is what I've learned about myself over time. I've tried so many of them, and they just don't work for me, really. The idea of a clamshell device like this specifically, having this kind of natural space to put your fingers behind to use the shoulder buttons means that you're kind of reaching around the entire device, and it feels more ergonomic than you were expecting it to be. Despite being a vertical device, it still feels really comfortable.
How are the buttons, Federico? I know that you're not a fan of clicky buttons. That's something everybody listening should know.
I should say, for the record, at the moment, my favorite controller, which is also the quietest controller that I can get, is the DualSense, the PS5 one. And specifically, if we're talking about like the combination of ergonomics and silent buttons, I've been using the DualSense Edge, which is the fancier version of the DualSense, because it's slightly thicker and larger, and it's more comfortable for my hands. But
I love the DualSense Edge. I have one as well.
yeah, it's a very good controller. The buttons on this thing they're clicky, but it's okay because, like Brendon said, like I really, really like how sort of naturally my hands wrap around the lower half of the console.
Right.
And like I appreciated that as a kid with my smaller hands, and I keep appreciating that design with my adult hands. Like they're still wrapping around the base of the clamshell, and
Right.
yeah, that really works for me. I've been playing. So after my initial struggles with like not understanding how the SD card worked and how USB charging worked, and then Brendon told me you gotta use the default USB A to USB C cable.
Yeah.
Because just USB
Your cables
C
are
to
too
USB-C,
fancy. Your
yeah, that
cables are
one.
way too fancy.
You need to use the cable that comes in the box. And then I understood that like I didn't know how to put my games on it. And then I realized that I was dumb. The console literally says at the bottom there are 2 micro SD slots. One says int and another says ext. And I realized, oh, that means internal and external.
It does. It does.
So I realized, oh, okay, so I need to put my games on the external SD card.
Right.
And that's what I gotta plug in. I've been playing my personally ripped copy of Chrono Trigger for the Super
nice.
Nintendo. I ripped my own cartridge. I have we'll talk about this device in the future. John and I, we have this, it's called the open source cartridge reader. We'll talk about it at some point.
It's very cool. Yeah, we should talk about that in the operator.
Yeah.
I got the Game Boy operator.
Yeah,
in as
nice.
well.
We'll talk about those. And so yeah, I've been playing my own copy of Chrono Trigger with scan lines enabled, so to give the display that more retro feel. I do have a question, Brendon, about like
totally.
how do save files work? Like if down the road I want to take my progress from Chrono Trigger on the RG35XXSP to say, I don't know, the Delta emulator on my iPad, can I do that?
Yeah, you definitely can. I actually just moved my Pokemon Unbound, which we're only on episode 2, so I should probably mention. Pokemon Unbound, really great ROM hack of Pokemon Fire Red that turns it into like an entirely new game. It's an entirely fan-made Pokemon game. It's really wonderful. I would totally recommend it if you've been looking for a Pokemon game to play, but kind of don't want to replay some of the ones that you've maybe played a million times before. I've been playing that on Delta mainly for the past couple weeks, ever since Delta first launched on iOS officially. And I just downloaded the save file. So if you're in Delta, you can hover over, or I guess long press on any game, and then there's a manage save file button. And if you press that, there's a export save file button, which you can just export into your files or iCloud or whatever. But there's also an import save file button that works pretty much the same way. So what I would recommend doing is pop out the SD card. If you're using the external one, I think the save file, I might be wrong about this. You'll just check. It might be on the internal save file for the stock operating system that you'll need to pop out. But in there will be a folder called saves. And in there should be folders for each of the emulators. So whatever Super Nintendo emulator you're using, it should have your save files in there. And it's usually as easy as if it's using a different save file format than what Delta's using. You can just like go in and change the extension yourself in Finder, and then it'll be fine. I actually did that with Pokemon Unbound. It exported out of Delta, I think, as a .sav file, and then I needed to change it to .srm to work with MUOS, and it did. It worked fine. I have my save file in here, and I've just picked up and continued where I was at from there, which rocks. I will say one of the other benefits of MUOS is you don't need to use 2 SD cards. You can have everything just in the one. So you're just like popping out and using the one SD card for pretty much everything for both games.
That's nice. That's nice.
And everything else.
We're going to have, I guess, links in the show notes for the things that Brendon mentioned in terms of
totally.
the operating system and the different tweaks. Let me ask you, though.
Sure.
So far, like, you've had this for like, what, 2-3 days at the moment?
Yeah, it's been about 3 days, I think, at this point. Yeah.
Is this gonna be your everyday carry now instead of the Miu Mini?
I think yes. Yeah. I've made a really concerted effort to bring it with me while I've been commuting every day, and it just feels really good to have it like in my pocket. First of all, it fits in my pocket really well, which is, I think, maybe unsurprisingly, one of the most important things for me. But outside of that, the trade-offs, I think, aren't that big of a deal and will probably only get better with time, because this device, I think every I would say year or 2 years, there is a device that really, really pops off. Like the entire community kind of rallies around it. The original Miu Mini, I think, is one of those. The Anbernic RG35XXSP, the one that you and I had, John, although you had the M. Similarly, like that was a device that everyone owned.
Right.
And because of that, that meant there was a lot of really great custom firmware support. There was a lot of great support for like mods and hacks and things that you could do to kind of customize it and make it your own, or in a lot of cases, fix some of the issues. So like the clicky buttons, for example, somebody has already figured out that if you just open the thing up and put a little bit of electrical tape under each of the buttons, it stops the clicking.
Oh, interesting.
And also makes the buttons easier to press, which I've noticed the buttons are a little bit hard to press down on in some ways. It's like really the major knock against this device. The second thing is that if you open up the battery door, the battery is hovering kind of like right over the CPU, which is a little bit of a problem. And because of that, if you're playing games on higher end devices, on higher end consoles like the Dreamcast, for example, I was playing Sonic Adventure for a little bit just to like try it out. The device gets a little hot, like right in the middle of the device, like around like the halfway point between the D-pad and the face buttons, which like not uncomfortably hot, but like it does get warm enough that it is noticeable. And I think these are things that will probably get kind of smoothed out over time via people just like figuring out how to either open the device and add little hacks here and there like the tape, or alternatively like probably building heat sinks or things like that, that you can just kind of mod or throw in there yourself. And in some cases, some of this stuff can even get solved just via software and via the custom firmware. Things will get a little bit more efficient over time, which I think is exciting. So I think that this device has a really kind of exciting life ahead of it. And for me right now, it is exactly the thing that I have wanted for a long time. I am still curious about Miu's Flip. I think that seems to still be a far way off.
Which the company said it's not good yet.
It's not good yet. Yeah, was the
right. It's not released.
Yeah, the latest official word from Miu when somebody asked when it was coming out was "not yet." It's not good yet, quote unquote, which is just an unbelievable bit of corporate communication. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. But that is a device that will probably run Onion OS, which makes it immediately interesting to me. Also has 2 analog sticks on it, which means that it will be more natural for the games that it should be able to power, hypothetically. But there are some knocks against Miu recently. The Miu A30, I think, really underwhelmed people in a pretty significant way. Anbernic also has a Game Boy Micro style device that came out around the same time and just kind of like wiped the floor with Miu's, which was a little bit of a bummer, I think, considering all of the goodwill that they had built up based on the Mini and the Mini Plus. So I'm curious to try both devices and see which one works for me. But right now, even using a piece of custom firmware that wasn't built for the SP, I'm having an amazing time with the SP, which I think says to me that, in even like 2 to 3 months, this device is going to be even better.
Yeah, I just love the fact that it folds up and it just protects itself, protects the buttons, protects the screen. And I'm going to be going out to WWDC in about a week. And I'm hoping mine gets here from New Jersey because I want to take it with me. I'm really looking forward to.
I'm excited. Yeah. I'm excited for you.
I'm really looking forward to trying that on the plane. And it's not going to take up a lot of space in my bag because I got a lot of other stuff to take with me.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, how about you, Federico? Do you feel like you'll be investing more time into this thing, or is it more of a curiosity?
So I do think I will keep investing in this. I am very intrigued by the idea of emulating older systems, like specifically Super Nintendo and GBA. That's what I want to play. I want to play Pokemon Unbound, and I need to, because I finished it when I was very young and I don't remember the game a lot anymore. I want to replay Chrono Trigger and finish Chrono Trigger again. So I'm
It's a masterpiece.
I know, and so for these types of consoles, I do want to keep using this handheld, and like I think it's also fun to play around with like custom OSes and like
Oh yeah.
tweaking the experience. I do have for the future one last surprise that I need to spring on you guys when
Of
it comes
course.
to
Okay.
when it comes to retro gaming and older consoles. And I
Okay.
think
Me too, actually. But you go first.
okay. Well, I'll save it for the next episode, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
I'll shout out real quick a device that I've been testing out for about as long as we have been planning making this show, which is, I'll hold it up. It's the Clicks keyboard.
oh my, you have it.
Oh,
The
I have
iPhone.
one too. I
Oh.
actually have one of these too.
Do
Yeah, I
you?
do.
Yeah. I saw Riley, the creator of Delta, talking a little bit on Threads about how he wanted to pick one up to see how it worked as a physical controller for Delta. And immediately I was at Walt Disney World when I read that post on Threads. And while I was waiting in line for a roller coaster, was like, I'm ordering one. I need to know. And I ordered one. And I've been messing around with it. I'll talk about it maybe a little bit in the next episode, how it feels, both as what it's intended for and also what it's not intended for.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think. I got the bright yellow one, so mine lights up the room.
Yeah, very nice.
They just released some new colors as well, from what I've seen.
Very nice.
Which, of course, right after I bought mine.
Of course. Yeah, I have a gray one on the way, but who knows where it is. It's still not here.
Stuck in custom
Eventually.
somewhere.
Stuck in custom somewhere. But yeah, I do have another portable that I want to share with you, and I think it's something that I would be very surprised if you guys know that it even exists. I'll leave you with that.
Okay.
That being said, John, do you want to take us home?
Yeah, let's wrap this up for today. I mean, we'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. We're on Instagram and Threads, and we're also on Mastodon. Just look for Viticci, that's Viticci, and I'm John Voorhees, JohnVoorHes, and Brendon is Brendon Bigley everywhere, both on Threads and Mastodon, as well as a co-host of Into the Aether, and writing over at wavelengths.online.
Beautiful.
Talk to you in 2 weeks, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.